Hi, this is Stephen Crying from Startup Health. I'm here with my Free Zone podcast partner from Strategic Coach, Dan Sullivan.
Steve, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to dig in to today's episode, which is around the topic of creating compelling offers versus making convincing arguments. And I think the genesis of this is from Dean Jackson's motto from many years ago, which is it's much better to make a compelling offer than a convincing argument. I think it's actually a compelling offer is 10 times more persuasive than a convincing argument.
One of the things I've really noticed is that our world is very, very influenced by the educational system that people went through. And in the teaching world, the vehicle that the teachers use, and I guess the people who write the books and everything, is that you make a convincing argument, okay, that you show why what you're teaching is right and that other views are not right. So you want as much proof to convince people that what you're saying is right. And so you can convince somebody with the argument, but it doesn't get them to take any action. It doesn't take them, any action. In the market world where we all live as entrepreneurs, people don't want to be convinced, they want to be compelled. Okay, and that is that you have a solution for them. And if you just do a few simple steps, you'll get a solution, and they've done all the work for the solution and you get it. It's like Tylenol. I'm not going to try to convince you why Tylenol is really, really great. What I'm going to do is encourage you to take it because the headache that's driving you crazy will disappear in about 15 minutes. So one way of saying it is that the convincing argument is about the speaker, but a compelling offer is about the listener.
I think we've got some great examples of what a compelling offer is. Let's talk about what a convincing argument sounds like.
Yeah, well, I think a convincing argument would be, we've studied data from the economy, and it looks like we're entering one of those periods. And I've been through this about 5 or 6 times in my entrepreneurial career, and it looks like we might be heading into a recession, okay? And that is calculated that if you have 2 economic quarters in a row where there's a loss, then you're in a recession. And everything's pointing to this direction. And we'd like you to know that we're kind of getting close to a recession. And you should think about that because it's very, very important for you to understand that things might have to change and you might have to do something different and you may have to correct your whole approach to the marketplace. Okay. That's a convincing argument. And then you bring enough data forward as convincing argument, but it doesn't leave the listener with any solution.
You basically just dumped on them.
Yeah.
And spent time, by the way, doing it. Interestingly enough, convincing them to stop spending.
Yeah. Yeah, which when people stop spending, that speeds up the recession.
Exactly. And so let's flip it around. What's the version of that that's the compelling offer?
A lot of people are really scared today that we're going into a recession, and we've got a 3-step process that makes you recession-proof.
Sounds like a lot fewer words. It's about you, not them. I mean, them, not you. What are the characteristics of that compelling offer?
Well, that's going to happen really fast, and they don't have to do much work to get it. They don't have to know what a recession is. They don't have to understand what a recession is. They just need to be, what's going to be really bad for other people isn't going to be bad for them.
So you don't need to go through the DOS and tell them all the dangers, and you don't need to tell them about all the big opportunities. You don't have to talk about all the strengths that you're going to maximize. You're giving them just a compelling offer.
Yep.
All right. So are you now able yourself to filter this faster when you look at your own messaging, tool names, book names, even Strategic Coach overall?
First of all, just a little background. I'm an advertising guy, so I was a copywriter in a big agency in the early 70s, and advertising was all about compelling offers. My creative director took me to a steak restaurant. First week, I was hired into the agency. And it was one of those steak places where they bring a cart with raw meat and you choose the piece of meat that you want. I don't find that a particularly positive experience when they do that, but some restaurants insist on it. Then it comes back, like a half hour later, it comes back and it smells great. You can almost hear it on the plate, that you can still hear it cooking on the plate. It's got all sorts of neat things like potatoes and gravy and fried onion rings and whatever around it. So when the steak came, he asked the waiter to bring the cart back, and the cart was there. And he says, now look at the cart, what's on the cart, and look what's on your plate. And he says, we're selling what's on your plate. We're not selling what's on the cart. We're not selling steak. We're selling sizzle. So I've got that background. So, for example, the document is called Best Compelling Offers. And the sheet itself is a compelling offer. Okay, because people say, oh my gosh, a way of thinking about best compelling offers. So to a certain extent, all the tools we have a compelling offer title. And compelling offers, they're a compelling offer because they're usually 7 words or less, and they're not abstract words. So you instantly get the essence, okay, is that everybody's thinking in one direction, and then you present a message that immediately just shocks them and changes the way they're thinking about things.
So how effective was this conversation at shifting people who think they're making compelling offers when they talk about their business now into actually really making sure they're doing it all the time? So you brought this up in the workshop yesterday. I want to talk through.
So just the setting is 30 highly successful entrepreneurs. I mean, 25, 30 years experience. All the incomes are in the 7 figures. All their, business are in the 8 and 9 figure, some of them 10-figure companies. So these are people who are really successful. They're really good salespeople. And I just said, based on your experience, what would you say are the 3 best compelling offers that you have created so far in your entrepreneurial career? I give them a couple minutes to brainstorm that. They'll come up with 5 or 10 things. I show them what I've done with my 3, and my 3 are who, not how is a very compelling offer. The gap in the gain is a very compelling offer. And number 3 is 10 times is easier than 2 times is my suggestions for a compelling offer. And these just happen to be 3 book titles with a major book publisher, and they've been bestsellers, and they've delivered to coach an enormous number of new clients over the last 3 years. But these all started with thinking tools in Strategic Coach.
And for you, what might be the convincing argument version, just to contrast it with all 3 of those? If you weren't making a compelling offer on who, not how, what would be your convincing argument version of who, not how?
Well, when you study how businesses become very, very successful, what you notice is that there's a particular pattern in businesses that as a person becomes more skilled, then it's possible for that person then to develop a team around them where some of the activities that the skillful person is doing can be given to other people who are trained just to handle individual activities. And as a result of that, the skillful person in the business can make a lot of progress. And I just want to show you some statistics from Harvard Business School to show this, from 1950 to 2000, the people who were the best delegators went the highest in the corporation.
I don't think I have heard you ever recite data to support your ideas in 20 plus years, Dan. So,
yeah. But data is what you need to actually convince. Data is one of the things that you need. And you have to quote an authoritative body, like Harvard Business School is an authority. So you quote authorities, you quote data, but you talk in generalities, like the business world, skillful people, delegating, and everything like that. But at the end of it, the listener is sitting there and saying, well, that's interesting.
yeah.
Or not. But if you were trying to sell something, that wouldn't move anyone closer to being compelled to buy.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So for us, and I brought this up on the last episode around our moonshots, but our moonshots are compelling offers, right? The T1D moonshot is about finally getting to a place where we can see the roadmap to how innovators can help us prevent, manage, but ultimately cure type 1 diabetes.
Yep.
The moonshot is all about a compelling offer.
Yep. Yep.
One of the things I found fascinating is how many different entrepreneurs and investors and philanthropists and others are out there either funding or working on or donating to things that they hope will just be added to the cure formula. But no one's out there saying, let's just organize a collaboration around getting to a cure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what, for us, what we've done to productize a moonshot and turn it into a thing that is a cross-disciplinary collaboration to solve a problem.
Yeah. And if you go back to the origin of the term moonshot, it was President Kennedy in 1961. Upon learning that the Soviets were planning a project to the moon, because we were in the middle of the Cold War, he gave a speech. I think it was in Houston. Mm-hmm. It was broadcast live and went, across the country. And he says, by the end of the decade, we are going to launch a rocket that lands a man on the moon, and that man will come back safely. We will do this by the end of the decade. And at that point, the United States had no ability to actually do that. Okay.
No technology, no money, none of the skills or capabilities, but there were 400,000 people and 20,000 companies that helped make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were compelled to join the effort by his speech.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about this here. I wasn't planning to, but I think it's an interesting perspective or lens to put on to talk about moonshot. So we've had a cure disease moonshot since we launched the moonshot probably 7 years, that moonshot 7 years ago, put a bunch of companies into that moonshot. As soon as we turned it into a single mission like type 1 diabetes or Alzheimer's or youth mental health or pancreatic cancer, all of a sudden, it's almost like it catalyzes all the people that care about that one particular thing. So cure disease is just a general category, but type 1 diabetes, there are mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and lots of children diagnosed with that. And then people go through a process of learning and seeing, and then finding out there's no cure, finding out that there's been a lot of failed attempts at that. And that while there has been a lot of great progress and a lot of great money put in it, at the end of the day, we still are without a cure. And there's always been this promise, we're only 5 years away. As soon as you put a framework out there, a compelling offer, like there is a T1D moonshot that is a collaboration across entrepreneurship and business and philanthropy and investors and everybody that is going to focus on bringing every resource around the world to the table to make sure that we get there in a compelling way. And we're just going to iterate our way there quarter after quarter. Everybody's reaching out. And the difference between a general cure disease moonshot and a type 1 diabetes moonshot is night and day.
Yeah. Yeah. No question about it. You want to join, you want to find out, you want to write a check. And you really find that great things in history have actually happened with very compelling offers. I think it was 1938, Albert Einstein, already a Nobel Prize winner, probably the most widely known physicist, maybe not the greatest physicist, but certainly the most known physicist of the 20th century, wrote a letter, not a long letter, to Franklin Roosevelt, President of the United States. And he said, I just want you to know that a new source of energy has been discovered, will be developed, and we'll be at war, and it will be used to make a weapon, and a single bomb with this energy source can wipe out a whole city. Okay. Just a single bomb dropped by a single plane can wipe out a whole city. And the Japanese already have a program working on this. The Germans already have a program working on this. And the next war, which we all see coming, the country that develops this weapon first and uses it will win the war. And that launched immediately in today's dollars a $16 billion government program involving 300,000 people that developed the first atom bomb, and they dropped them. And when they dropped the bomb, they dropped the first one. They got no response, so they dropped a second one and let the Japanese know that they had 10 more, and they had the 10 cities already picked out.
It's a catalyzing statement. You described less than 7 words, no abstract words, very specific.
And about the listener, not about the speaker.
About the listener, not the speaker. Talk about that.
Well, basically, you're talking about a reality that the speaker is facing or is going to face. And if they don't have something new as a solution, it's going to be a bad experience. But if they have the new solution, it's going to be a good experience.
So let's use my type 1 diabetes moonshot as an example again. How might you look at the next step about making a compelling offer to get involved in it? So the name of it is itself a short, compelling offer, the T1D moonshot. But there's 2 different stakeholders to get involved. One that's backing the moonshot, providing the capital for the moonshot. The other are the innovators and the entrepreneurs that are going to power the innovation.
Let me ask you a question, because you're deep into this experience and I'm not. Do you find that the central motivation for it, both on the part of the entrepreneur and also the funders, is that they personally know someone who has this problem?
100% of the time.
Yeah. So here's the thing. You're not just talking to entrepreneurs and talking to funders. You're talking to people who deeply, deeply feel the pain that comes from this problem not being solved.
Yes. In fact, that explains the previous comment I made a few minutes ago that cure disease is like this general moonshot. But people are like, oh yeah, disease is in every family. But as soon as you go type 1 diabetes, somebody says, my daughter was diagnosed with it. Sadly, I lost my daughter from it. 2 of my children have it. My dad passed away from it. I live with it. And by the way, pancreatic cancer, the moonshot conversation started with a friend of mine with pancreatic cancer. Alzheimer's, lost my father, my grandmother, Alzheimer's or dementia. You all of a sudden see a connection, a human connection to everybody specifically around when you have a non-abstract definition within the disease into, like, as I said, type 1 diabetes, Alzheimer's or pancreatic cancer.
Yeah. And I think that that's part of what compels. First of all, it's a personal experience that's now negative, but has the possibility of being transformed into positive.
Yep.
Yeah. The other aspect about it is, in describing the moonshots, is it a home run at the end of 9 innings, or are there a whole bunch of hits and runs scored on the way to the 9th inning, using baseball language? In other words, we're going to be coming up with solutions all along the way.
I think that's a great question, because one of the most interesting things I've learned is there's a lot of people out there that are looking at it very black and white, happened or not happened. Not many people are looking at it and saying every quarter we're making progress. And there are steps, by the way, to getting there, right? There's some cases it happens that you have to run clinical trials and make sure it works, or what doesn't work, and get data. And in other cases, it's time. And in other cases, there's so many things, but they don't seem to be measuring their progress. It's very black and white. Either, hey, we're making progress, nobody can name it, or we haven't made enough progress, or it hasn't happened yet. Very amorphous kind of things. We've looked at it and said, we're going to measure and, by the way, celebrate the progress every quarter on our way there, and not just look at it like the Apollo missions, right? How many different Apollo missions did you have to get under your wraps to get to the one that would land successfully on the moon and come back?
Yeah. Yeah. And I can remember 11 was the moon landing, but it might have been 8 or 9. And it was a couple of years previously, but it was the first time that a rocket had been sent up and it circled the moon. It actually came within the vicinity of the moon. And there was the moment when they were able to look back and take a picture of the Earth. And nobody had seen that picture before. No human had ever seen what the Earth actually looked like. And they did. And I think it was that picture was a game changer, because nobody had seen the Earth before. They actually were within 100 miles of the moon, but they didn't land on the moon. So it was really close. They proved that they could go to the moon, but they hadn't proven yet. So that was progress. Those were progress steps.
Yeah, stories of progress. We built this whole media engine to document the journey and to document every innovator, entrepreneur's steps, every quarter, every half year, every year that they're making towards achieving the moonshot. And it's fascinating to look at. There's a lack of coverage of any of that in traditional media. Yeah. I think there's a lack of access to a lot of that. If you Google a disease or an illness to really see what's there, it seems like it's either under wraps or there's an element of secrecy or privacy that people try to keep around that progress. We have found when you share the progress, by the way, good and bad, setbacks and learning, and there was the Apollo mission where people, sadly died, and there was lots of different things along the way that led to the achievement, but it was documented for a decade. And I think that is what we're trying to do with the media storytelling that we do and the event storytelling that we do, to make sure that the entrepreneur at the very early stages and as they progress through are important milestones to get to the cure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why did you ask that question? I think it's an interesting question about, is it a zero-sum game?
Well, I think the thing is that people are excited. So, for example, someone that from New York, Babs and I have been involved with the creation of a Broadway musical that's based on the life of Lloyd Price, who arguably is the first crossover singer and composer from what was called rhythm and blues to rock and roll. He's really kind of like the first rock and roll singer. And he changed the entire music world in 1951. He had a 2-minute song called Lottie Miss Claudie, and it went big. But the biggest thing about it was the first time that you had a national white teenage audience for a black musician, okay? And the record companies just suddenly realized there was a whole new market here and a whole new kind of music that would draw teenagers. And this is the first time that teenagers bought records, and they were 45s. All records up until then had been long playing records, and that this was a 45, and they had cheap record buyers were coming out, but they didn't really care, and it was the start of rock and roll. So everybody zeroes in on Elvis Presley, and but that's a half a decade later, and there was this huge growth of black musicians in the United States who created the entire foundation, and Lloyd Price was the original pioneer who did this, so he died in the spring of 2021, and it was based on a documentary that my friend in New York, Jeff Madoff, he told us what it was, and we were up in your area having lunch at a restaurant, and he said, I have to take a visit to the Lou. Babs and I looked at each other and we said, why don't we invest? And he came back and we said, Jeff, we're really supportive of what you're doing. He said, that's very kind. And we said, we'll invest. And it was a knockout to him. And so he said, well, this is not a safe investment. There's no guarantee on return. And I said, well, we're not doing it for that reason. We're doing it because you're our friend. And both of us think that it would just be a neat thing to be involved in the creation of a Broadway musical. We're involved in something that's just really neat and really exciting. So my sense is that when you have a compelling offer, people want to be involved in the compelling offer, regardless if its success isn't tomorrow, or maybe success is 5 years from now or 10 years ago. They want to be involved in something. One is that they just think is really neat, but the other thing is they think is really important.
When you talk to a philanthropist who's been giving their money away and not getting any ROI and not being happy with the progress, and tell them they can actually put money to work in diabetes and also get a return on investment on top of what they're giving towards the cause, that's a compelling offer. Because now you're saying, right now you're just giving it away. You're not getting any return on investment. You're hoping and wishing it goes towards, a cure. It's a shrug. might be a tax write-off, but that's about it. I think on the convincing argument is trying to tell an investor they can also make an impact with their money. And I think I have found that those individuals and organizations and families who are already giving money to type 1 diabetes are finding being involved in the moonshot much more exciting of a value proposition than trying to convince investors they should also care about type 1 diabetes.
Yeah. One of the, I think it's a general condition in society, but it's harder to find meaning today. People have meaning. They've got comfort, they've got convenience, they've got all sorts of need benefits that have been taken care of, Maslow's pyramid, Here in North America, here in the United States, do we have survival problems? No, not really. Do we have safety issues? Yeah, it's a possibility, but not really. Not like Ukraine or not like the Golan Heights. We don't live in that type of world. Do we have belonging issues? Now you start to get some issues. What do you belong to that has meaning? And the normal organizations that, you belong to a neighborhood and there's nice restaurants and you're in a condo and they say it's a vital, intelligent community. Yes, but I never see them, we never see those people. So the big thing is, I think that one of the things that you're hitting is a belonging issue, that they're belonging something. And the next Maslow's pyramid, there's survival, safety, belonging. But the next one is achievement where you're esteemed. In other words, what you belong to is creating achievements that give you a sense of esteem. It makes you proud to be part of it. And the next one up, which I've never really gotten because I think it's a dated word, but self-actualization. And that is that you've participated and you've contributed and you've been important within a social setting, business setting that really, really created something that had a big impact. So I think you're hitting, that you're providing something that gives people a specific set of meaning that ordinary life just doesn't create for them.
Interesting. Yeah. It's another compelling offer, right?
Yeah.
Versus convincing argument.
Joe Polish quotes this a lot, that Napoleon Bonaparte said, "My whole life, my whole career changed when I realized a man would die for a blue ribbon."
Yeah.
I just ordered a lot of blue ribbons.
Yeah.
And gave him a chance to die.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. It's interesting. I hadn't dissected the shift we've made so much in the last year around these specific single mission moonshots, but I think you're talking about, I found a very hungry community.
Yep.
I've assembled an incredible impact board of the leading entrepreneurs, investors, philanthropists, industry execs, academics who care deeply about that meaning and about coming together to do something, have a chance to do something that's finally going to make such a big impact. And if there could be an ROI on top of it, that's just gravy, but we're going to get this done.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because what I think you're doing is helping me accelerate even my thinking around transforming our general moonshots into specific moonshots and enabling more and more of them to create that meaning for people.
Yeah. Well, because you're creating a community and you want the same mindset coming in from all directions.
Exactly. Shared mindset. Dan, always great seeing you.
Thank you a lot, Steve.